Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Looking at the so-called lucky charm, Shiro gritted her teeth in anger. Killing intent rampaged around her with every passing second she spent looking at the item. *KRRR. Synchronizing with her killing intent, ice spread outwards, shocking the party. What's gotten into her? Aram asked quickly as she retreated away from the incoming ice. I don't know. Lyrica replied with worry plastered on her face. She had never seen Shiro like this before, and even in the mutated dungeon, she was never this angry. Shiro, who was the source of this, couldn't help but have flashbacks of her death. That moment when the hero watched her die. Her name tag started to turn black once again. However, no one saw this since they were focused on Shiro herself. Shiro. Lyrica couldn't help but shout out when she felt something terribly wrong with her current situation. Lyrica's shout snapped Shiro out of her daydream as she realized that it was just a statue and nothing more. As she calmed down, her name had also returned to its normal white color. F***CK. She cursed before throwing the statue against the wall with all her strength. *Bang. The collision caused the party to flinch a little. As for the item, the throw had caused it to break into several pieces, which in turn renamed the item to Broken Area's Lucky Charm. Broken Area's Lucky Charm. A lucky charm from the world, Arya. Records state that this is a statue of the hero who saved the world. However, it was subsequently broken by a certain enraged girl. This item is now useless. Will block a single fatal attack from an enemy. Limited to level 55, unusable. Watching her walk away from the pile of loot, they tried to reach out to her, but stopped when they saw her malevolent glare. Both Lyrica and Madison paled at the glare, since it felt like they were being stared down by a powerful monster. As for Aram, she was more concerned about what set Shiro off. A lucky charm? Aram muttered with confusion. The item was no doubt a life-saving item for a low-leveled adventurer. She couldn't understand why it would set off her anger. The item says it's from a world called Arya. Could it be that she was from that world? She has no background and just sort of popped out of nowhere. But that's kind of far-fetched though. So it must be something to do with the design of the item, or she had seen this before. Maybe she associated it with the person who broke her links. Aram, though, with narrowed eyes. Storing the item away, she decided to keep it for now and see if she could ask Shiro about it in the future. Meanwhile, Shiro was currently trying to calm her heart down. After she heard Lyrica's shout, she calmed down a little and started to think about the item. Why is something from Arya in this world? She thought with a frown. When she had reincarnated, she wondered why she was in this world and how she got here. However, if there were items from Arya as well, that meant that there could be a possibility that she could return as well. If me and some random item of the bastard could be in this world, then that means there should be a way to travel between them. I suppose they did teach in school that the area we occupy right now is only a small part of Earth. Since that's the case, maybe Arya was dragged into this as well, which is why I was reincarnated here as a snow girl. She muttered. Frowning a little, she held her chin with her hand and started to walk slowly whilst thinking about the possibilities. If there is indeed a connection, or if Arya had fused with this world, that means I still have a chance to kill the light hero. She muttered with a grin. Ha 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 ha. Looks like there is hope if I have a chance to kill God's chosen. Ha ha ha. Light-bearing hero, you better clean your ass. Shiro narrowed her eyes as she had a new purpose. Find a way back to Arya and kill the light-bearing hero who had already killed her once. Since I have a chance to kill him, I'll need to get myself back into Tier 6. Most importantly, fix my mana links. Nantion should still be in New York, so if he doesn't appear before my soon, I'll go find him and see if I can get the medicine. She muttered. She needed the Phoenix Rebirth pill so that she could enter Tier 3 soon without much time wasted. Not only that, but the stronger she was, the easier it would be for her to search for other medicine to fix her links. Most of the medicine that could fix her are all guarded by strong beasts that at minimum is Tier 4 in strength. If she enters the peak of Tier 3, with her arsenal of weaponry from her Snowmancer class, she should be able to kill them. Hearing some footsteps behind her, she saw the party walking towards her after clearing out the vault of all the things they could claim. Are you okay? Lyrica asked with worry. Yeah, I'm fine now. Don't worry about it. Shiro smiled slightly, feeling more cheerful than ever. That's good. Lyrica sighed in relief when saw that Shiro was quite happy since her body posture was a little bouncy. It was something similar to when you would tell a kid that they'll be eating at a fast food restaurant soon. Their excitement would radiate off of their bodies in a way not unlike Shiro right now. Aram frowned in suspicion since Shiro had just gone from being absolutely livid to happiness land in a short moment. I have to say, Shiro, you are one bipolar girl. Aram eventually smiled. Shiro only shrugged since she couldn't deny that fact. There were several ways she could act around people. The bubbly kind that would always try to interact with others, which is the personality she used in the trial. The stone-cold assassin that would always give people the sense of dread, or the confident mage that will use her power to prove her confidence. And naturally, she was most relaxed as herself. Shiro, a snow girl that had a second chance in life and had the purpose of growing stronger so that she could kill a certain hero that had betrayed her. Of course, there was also the choice of reverting back to the time where she was being experimented, the moment when her psychology was a little twisted, and a time where she would also be known as the insane bitch. Obviously, it was fixed with some rehabilitation, but she could always simulate the effect so that she could creep some of her enemies out. Thinking about a few fun scenarios that she could use when interrogating someone, Shiro couldn't help but grin sadistically. The party looked at Shiro blandly. In a short moment, she had changed her emotion once again, but this time, it was that of sadistic joy. All they could think of was the F***CK is she thinking about. Anyways, let's get out of here. I've managed to get the item I needed, so we shouldn't stay here longer than needed. How do we get out? There is a teleportation circle in the corner of the vault, and it should teleport you back to the entrance. We'll swim back to the submarine from there. Aram smiled and showed them to the teleportation circle. The party took this time to put on their helmets once more. Shiro, on the other hand, took this chance to memorize the runes and the design of the circle so that she could do some experiments with it if the opportunity ever comes up. Plus, some research was always welcome. Activating the magic circle, the party was teleported outside into the ocean before swimming back to the submarine. Seems like we still have some time to spare. Aram smiled when she saw that they could have been in there for another 30 minutes. Well, Shiro did help increase out clearing time by quite a lot. Madison smiled. With Shiro in the party, it felt like everything was on easy mode. True, everything is easier with Shiro in the party. Lyrica agreed. In that case, then you girls can go clear a level 50 dungeon together. I won't join so that it should prove to be a challenge to you. Shiro grinned. Pui, who said it was easy? Life is never easy. Madison quickly changed her mind as Lyrica agreed. Shiro only chuckled in response. But seriously, I believe that you girls can do it. Both of your classes are some of the best classes available at this stage, so clearing level 50 dungeons should be a piece of cake as long as you don't drop your guard. You really think so? Lyrica asked with some uncertainty in her voice. I honestly do. Shiro nodded. She wasn't lying. Both classes had stat growth and skills far above the average class. If she had to grade the class and its potential from the power demonstrated at an early stage, she would say that both classes should be around grade A to S. Lyrica had the potential to reach Elven Blade Saintess, while Madison had the potential to upgrade into a class she had never seen before. Just the hidden class Demon Knight was shocking enough, as it is with frightening potential in both attack and defense. She couldn't wait for the day where both Lyrica and Madison entered C-class. She's right, you know. Both of you have talent rarely seen in people. You shouldn't waste it by doing something you're always comfortable with. Pyroza has plenty of level 50 dungeons for you to try. Aram agreed since the party of 3 had to be one of the most efficient parties she had seen in her life. Not only that, but the trio's leveling speed was even more ridiculous. In the short time she had known Shiro, she had leveled up from 29 to 45. The growth of 16 levels was incredible when she considered how short that space of time was. Well, I suppose we do need a challenge, Lyrica said after a short moment. Madison nodded her head in agreement, since they did grow fastest when they were challenging dungeons without Shiro's help. If they took Shiro into a dungeon, it would be overkill, level 50 or not. When we get back, you girls can go into the dungeon. I need to do something anyways. Could it be your 5th star? Lyrica asked curiously. Yup. This miss is about to level up into a 5-star class. Shiro grinned. Oh, 5 stars, huh? I've never seen someone that had managed to complete 5 stars. Aram called out from the driver's seat. It was common knowledge that the final star was one of the hardest tasks to complete. With Shiro's capabilities, she should be able to pass. Do tell us if you get anything cool, okay? Madison smiled. Sure. After a few moments of small talk, the party arrived back at the boat. Well, you're back quite early, Captain Sanders said with a small smile. I managed to get what I need, so here we are. Aram shrugged. Well, you heard her, boys. Reel them in. He called out as the claws picked up the boat. Shiro walked away to the changing room and changed back to her outfit. On the way out, she reunited with Ian, whose first instinct was to ask for some food. I've only been away for 2 hours, and you ran out of food already? Fat bird. Shiro couldn't help but exclaim. Asterisk chirp. Ian slapped her wings in protest when Shiro called her fat. Don't you eat more than me? Shouldn't you be the fat one? She protested in her mind, but it wasn't as if Shiro could hear her. Shiro narrowed her eyes in suspicion, since it felt like Ian was becoming more intelligent as time passed. Not in terms of IQ, since she is still a bird brain, but rather she felt more human. Maybe it's because she's leveling up. I heard that top-tier pets do take a humanoid form after a certain level. She thought to herself, dismissing Yin's actions as growth. She would occasionally talk with Ian, but mostly kept silent whilst sitting on the highest point on the boat. Even though she had calmed herself down, her mind couldn't help but drift back to the fact that there was a connection to Arya in this world. I wonder if they're still alive, she thought with a bit of nostalgia. Not everyone in the hero's party was bad. If they were there at the time of the hero's betrayal, she was sure that they would have helped her out. But doubts started to surface again since they were part of the hero's party and they were with him for longer. Would they actually help me when the time called for it? She wondered. Shaking her head, Shiro dismissed the thoughts. This isn't like me. I shouldn't be doubting everything like this. Plus, even if they are alive, I should move on since it would bring them danger if I got them mixed up with my feud with the light-bearing hero. Shiro thought with a small smile. Glancing over at Lyrica and Madison, who were chatting happily, Shiro smiled contently since those two were sincere with their feelings. However, she wasn't sure about how long it would last in this world, especially since she went from a pacifist who didn't like to fight to a killing machine with ruthless efficiency. Only time will tell, she muttered. Once they returned to the camp, the first thing they did was split the loot. I'll get your outfits done soon. Just give me a text, and I'll show you a few designs. Aram smiled before bidding farewell. Unfortunately, none of the loot Shiro had managed to acquire was actually useful for her, so she just gave some to Lyrica and Madison before going to sleep. The next morning, she was making her way to the auction house. Putting a few of these on auction, Shiro decided that she may as well get some money for the items she didn't need. While she could indeed recycle a few items for their skills, the items that she had gotten didn't have any worthwhile skills for her. The next stop was the Adventurers Guild. She needed to update her status once more. Welcome, Naya. Ohaya? So it's you, Shiro. Well, are you going to surprise me again today? Susie smiled. Maybe. Shiro shrugged. Giving Susie her ID, she waited patiently for her to update it. Wow, level 45 already, Naya. If you continue at your pace, you might break the record for fastest class C, you know? She said before handing back Shiro's ID card. Although the difference from last time was just 2 levels, it should be noted that the last stretch of levels before the peak of a class was the hardest to level up. That was due to the fact that you couldn't surpass levels and kill higher level monsters as easily. The difference between level 50 and 51 wasn't something one can cross. However, she doesn't know that Shiro's stats had effectively doubled, so fighting level 51 monsters was still within her reach. Name: Shiro. Estimated age: 13. Class: Ice Mage. LVL: 45. Mages Association membership: VIP, New York branch. Priority rank: 9, New York branch. After bidding Susie farewell, Shiro made her way back to the camp. Welcome back. Are you going to give your 5th star up a try now? Lyrica asked as she had been doing her morning practices. Yep. See you soon. Shiro smiled before tapping the initiate button under her task. A golden portal expanded beneath her and teleported her away. Blinking her eyes a few times, Shiro looked around her and saw that she was in an empty field of white. She was currently standing on some sort of marbled floor that stretched as far as the eye could see. You have entered the truth realm. Prepare to face your shadow. Looking at the notification, Shiro's first instinct was to check what she had on her. Right, so it seems like I can use all of my skills but no tools. That means Ascendant Dream isn't allowed either. She thought to herself when she noticed the lack of her necklace. Flexing her fingers, 2 copies of Harbinger's song appeared in her hands. Cracking the bones all over her body, Shiro narrowed her eyes in concentration. Since it was to fight an exact copy of herself, it meant that it had her abilities and stats. Begin. The moment the notification appeared, an identical version of Shiro appeared in front of her with 2 hand cannons in her hands. Asterisk bang bang. They both shot at the same time. The bullets collided with each other before being deflected in 2 different directions. The shadow didn't pause for long as she crouched down and dashed towards Shiro with Een-style phantom arts. Inserting mana into her eyes, Shiro made sure that she didn't lose sight of her shadow. Asterisk bang bang. Shooting twice with her gun, Shiro frowned when the shadow bent her body to avoid the bullets before firing back with her own gun. Instead of dodging, Shiro shifted her foot, which caused a giant ice wall to erect in front of her. Asterisk crack crack. The bullet hit the wall and destroyed parts of it, but failed to penetrate. Her shadow frowned a little before flipping backwards and erected a giant ice pillar for herself to stand on. Pinching her index and thumb together, an ice flute was created in her hands. Bringing the flute to her mouth, the shadow started to play a gentle melody. Shiro, who was suddenly attacked with a massive headache, had to blink her eyes a few times to try reorientate herself. However, when she did, she saw 10 clones charging at her. Flute combined with cold illusion, huh? Shiro thought with a frown. She hadn't paid attention to the flute since she had other things to do, but she never expected the shadow to have access to everything she had. Even a hobby she decided to pick up on a whim but never practice again. Pivoting on her right foot, Shiro dodged the first clone and tried to counterattack. But that clone faded into cold mist, which in turn froze her arm a little. Widening her eyes, she quickly jumped backwards and erected several ice pillars for her to create some distance. But to her dismay, her clone was a copy of her with the same attributes. They parkoured through the pillars with ease, as some even managed to get ahead of her. Sliding across the ground, Shiro flicked her wrist, creating several ice spears that shot towards the clone. Asterisk bang bang bang. Just as she did that, 3 gunshots rang out as bullets shot towards her. Huh! She shouted out and stomped hard onto the ground. Killing intent exploded out of her body, and ice formed around her due to her passive. Asterisk crack crack poochie. 2 of the shots were barely stopped, but the last shot had penetrated the wall and pierced her arm. F asterisk CK. She cursed since all 3 shots were aimed precisely at the same spot. Quickly activating Fire of Life, Shiro tried to heal herself but froze when she felt danger behind her. Dodging to the side at the last moment, she saw her shadow with an ice sword in hand. Just as she had reacted and dodged, the shadow followed up and sliced her sword at Shiro. Shiro gritted her teeth and bent her body backwards before sending a kick towards the shadow. However, her kick had only phased through the shadow's body. Hashtag 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 hashtag. Of course, she uses Faded Snow movement. Shiro cursed and quickly rolled away. Gah, what a pain in the ass. She now somewhat understood what other people felt when she had fought them. But right after she said that, a magic circle appeared behind her. Holy sh asterisk t. She thought and instantly activated Faded Snow movement. An ice spear phased past her body. Shiro paled when she realized that her anal virginity would have been taken by her own shadow if she didn't use her skill. Flexing her fingers, several ice daggers appeared in her hands as she activated Ice Chain to lock down her shadow. Understanding what she was trying to do, The shadow also used Ice Chain and locked Shiro down. The two of them spent this time to make eye contact once more. A magic circle suddenly appeared behind the shadow and shot out an ice spear. Similar to what Shiro did, the shadow used faded snow movement to escape the dreaded spear. Looking down at the spear, the shadow glared at Shiro. "Who the hell are you glaring at, huh? You're the one who tried to take this Mrs. Ass first," Shiro retorted. The shadow rolled her eyes as the two of them struggled out of the ice chains and made some space between them. Asterisk bang 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 bang. Both of them shot towards each other, but their bullets only collided and deflected to the surroundings. Shiro suddenly had an idea and crafted a special whistle bullet that would let out a sound as it fired. Asterisk bang. Shooting the bullet, she also paired it up with cold illusions which disorientated her shadow. However, due to the fact that it was done hastily, she wasn't successful in creating illusions but instead disorientated her shadow. Asterisk bang 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 bang. 3 out of the 5 bullets hit while the other 2 phased through her body. Using Een-style phantom arts to quickly retreat, the shadow activated the fire of life and quickly healed itself. "You've got to be kidding me," Shiro muttered as she couldn't help but sigh at the fact that her arsenal of skills was so diverse. "Since that's the case, I'll have to try to make her run out of MP," Shiro thought. However, just as she had thought that, her shadow slammed her palm into the ground and froze the entire place over, activating both their passives of ice field affinity. "Oh right, the passive." Sighing heavily, Shiro couldn't help but lament about how she had made this quest harder by having such a diverse arsenal of skills. Now only that, but the shadow had constantly been trying to pierce her ass. "What the hell is your problem?" Shiro shouted out in annoyance. To have to fight whilst protecting her ass was harder than one would think. The moment her guard around her ass dropped even slightly, an ice spear would appear. Clashing with her shadow for a few more times, Shiro knew that this was going to be a long day. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. As for Aram, the first thing she did in the morning was research the item Shiro had broken in a fit of rage. "Curious," she muttered. The composition of the item was a little more advanced when compared to other life-saving items she had seen. The item seals the power belonging to a strong individual and preserves it over a long period of time. Not only that, but once a person had used the power stored inside, they can reuse it as long as they store more power into it. It was a reusable life-saving tool, if one had to call it something. Unfortunately, Shiro had broken it. But seriously, why was she angry? The statue looks quite handsome, and the description of the item said that it was the image of a hero. What could have possibly set her off? Aram sighed as she was curious to Shiro's background. Someone as talented and as injured as her doesn't just come out of nowhere. Shaking her head, she decided to place the item aside for now and start to design the outfits. She knew that Shiro liked the colors white and black, Madison liked black and red, whilst Lyrica liked white, green, yellow, and blue. One's an elf, one has a demon class, and the other is a powerful lowly, she muttered in humor. While Aram was designing the clothes, Lyrica and Madison were thinking about which dungeon they should challenge. However, when they were walking through the city, they never expected for them to run into Sylvia. "Sylvia?" Lyrica called out a little hesitantly. "Ah, it's you two." "Heya," she replied with a small but sad smile. "Do you want to sit down and have a chat for a bit?" Madison offered sense to her. It looked like Sylvia could really use some help. "Sure." She nodded after a moment of silence. Lyrica took them to a cafe she knew of nearby and sat near one of the window seats. "Would you like to order anything?" the waitress asked politely. "No, we're fine for now." Lyrica smiled. The waitress nodded before walking away. "So what happened? We never got word back from you," Madison asked. "Would you actively seek out the killer of 2 friends for a nice chat?" "Well, I guess friends are pushing it a little, since he did try to kill us after the dungeon." Sylvia sighed. She somewhat forgave Shiro, but the fact that she killed her friends was still there. That being said, if it wasn't for Shiro, they would have either died in the dungeon or died outside due to the mob. Lyrica and Madison stayed silent, since it was a fact they couldn't deny. "We can't change what happened, but we will do whatever we can to compensate you," I know a life is priceless, but we will do what we can. Lyrica sighed. Emin, you're still the same. Even after the dungeon, you haven't changed a bit. Sylvia smiled. I don't need any compensation. I just need some TIHM. Actually, how about we do something together? She smiled lightly. She could still remember Jonas's talk. Since they weren't trustworthy under pressure, why spend more thoughts on them? Make better friends who will stay even in the face of life and death. Well, me and Maddie were about to go into a level 50 dungeon. Want to join us? Lyrica asked. Sure. Sylvia smiled. It would also be a good chance for her to see if she was compatible with the party. Well, 2/3 of the party since Shiro wasn't here right now. HM? Where's Shiro? Sylvia asked. Oh, her? She's currently doing her 5th star up. Madison replied with a wave of her hand. So it's just us 3. Lyrica smiled. Probably for the best. Sylvia thought since it may be a little awkward. So which dungeon are we going to? She asked. We're going to the level 50 dungeon, Ocean Sky Fortress. Ocean Sky Fortress? Sylvia tilted her head a little. Isn't that one of the hardest level 50 dungeons? You need a party to even kill one of the monsters in there. She widened her eyes when she realized that they were talking about that Ocean Sky Fortress. I know, but that's better for us. Lyrica smiled knowingly. They had chosen the Ocean Sky Fortress due to this fact. Yup. Since Shiro has the power to solo monsters with ease, we should have the same kind of power, or else we would just be holding her back. Madison followed up. But isn't that too dangerous? Sylvia exclaimed at their recklessness. Hee, which is why we have life-saving items, and you to help us. Lyrica grinned. Plus, if we get stronger, we'll be able to synergize with Shiro better. Without us holding her back, our entire party's efficiency will go up. Madison agreed. Sylvia was speechless. What is this party? She asked herself. The normal procedure would be everyone making sure that they could actually handle a dungeon before attempting it. Not to mention, challenging a level 50 dungeon with 2 level 40 odds was just borderline insane, and not to mention suicidal. Aya, just look at your expression. Don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Lyrica smiled. Plus, we had to solo bosses when we were level 20, right, Maddie? This is just the usual. I'm still annoyed at that, you know? You two just watched as I, a tanker, fought the boss alone. My damage was complete trash back then. Madison clicked her tongue a little. Back then, she didn't have her current class, so her damage output was lower. Not only that, but all her stat points were allocated to focus around defense. Watching the two go over their adventures, Sylvia couldn't help but feel a twitch creeping up on her eye. What the hell is this abnormal party? She thought to herself. However, she could really use a change of pace right now. Fine. When are we leaving? She asked. Right now. Lyrica smiled and stood up. Leading the pseudo-party to the dungeon, they arrived at the dungeon entrance. Well, are you all prepped? Lyrica asked Sylvia. Since they hadn't entered a dungeon with just Sylvia, she wanted to double-check just in case anything went wrong later on. I'm stocked on MP potions. Sylvia nodded. Oh, try not to use potions unless you absolutely need to. There may be problems later down the line, Lyrica warned. All right. Seeing that Sylvia was prepared, the party entered the dungeon with just the 3 of them, much to the confusion of the surrounding people. Did 3 beauties just enter the dungeon by themselves? Someone asked out loud. Suicidal. Why didn't anyone stop them? Well, we didn't think they would be stupid enough to enter with just 3 people. Well, apparently they are. Che, what a pity. Naturally, the party was unaware of the commotion they had caused. When they arrived inside the dungeon, they saw that they were currently in a room with windows showing them the outside world. Sylvia glanced outside the windows before looking back at Lyrica and Madison. However, she was surprised to see their aura change drastically. Neither of them were joking around nor relaxed. Their face was serious as their eyes were constantly looking around to make sure that they were safe. The dungeon is pretty linear. Let's go, Lyrica said seriously before pulling out her weapon. Madison nodded as black mist coated her body. Since it was just the 3 of them, They had the choice of either killing the monsters quickly with the combined attack power of her and Lyrica, or they could wear it down slowly. Naturally, she chose the upfront and aggressive tactic of killing them quickly. Holding a giant axe like nothing, Madison loosened up her joints so that she could be more flexible in battle. Are you not tanking? Sylvia asked. Men? Well, no, since we would be at a disadvantage. Since there are only 3 of us, we can't fight prolonged battles or else we'll be too vulnerable. Therefore, we'll fight short battles that end the monster quickly. Madison explained. Right? Well, she wasn't wrong. It only applied to a single powerful adventurer in a lower-level dungeon. That way they could exhibit their full power without wasting their stamina on low-leveled enemies. However, they were lower level than the dungeon, so the tactic shouldn't be applied here. I really feel like that wouldn't work though, Sylvia said with worry. Well, we can see how the first fight turns out. We'll make some changes depending on what happens, Lyrica said as she finished stretching her body. Nodding at the two, she took the lead and charged down the corridor. Not too long after charging out, they found the first monster. She only briefly glanced at the stats before ignoring them. She shouted out as she twisted her body and sent out a wave of fire towards the monster. Madison wasn't too far behind. She was currently leaping through the air whilst twisting her body to increase her momentum. Boom. With Lyrica slashing the monster horizontally and Madison cleaving it in half, they killed it with relative ease. That should have warned the rest of them. Keep your guard up, Lyrica said with a frown. The battle was a little louder than she had hoped, but it wasn't too bad. At worst, it would have attracted the attention of more than 2 monsters. Even then, they had their ways to deal with both of them. As for Sylvia, she was speechless. She couldn't believe what she had seen. Did the 2 of them almost instant kill a level 50 monster? She thought in shock. If these 2 had improved so much in the short time they hadn't met, she couldn't even begin to imagine how much Shiro had improved. Wait for me, she shouted out when she realized that both Lyrica and Madison had left her behind during her musing and quickly ran after them. Meanwhile, will you stop targeting my ass? Shiro shouted out, dodging another strike from her shadow. The entire time she had been fighting, the shadow had demonstrated ways of using her abilities that she hadn't thought of. However, its main attack was still targeting her ass. Twisting her body to avoid an attack, she flexed her fingers and created a handful of daggers before throwing them towards her shadow. Bang 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 bang. The shadow shot the daggers out of the air with ease. Bingo! Shiro grinned before snapping her fingers. With the snapping of her fingers, the shards of the daggers exploded and sent out a wave of sound which harmonized to activate alongside her cold illusion. Unlike last time, Shiro was prepared and created a misty forest filled with ice trees and a severe drop in visibility. Suppressing her presence, Shiro created a hand cannon and aimed at her shadow. However, before she could even fire, she had to grit her teeth and quickly bend backwards to avoid the ice spike that had suddenly pierced towards her face. How? She quickly asked herself. Her presence was as little as it could be, not to mention, she had even used an illusion to confuse her shadow. Flipping her body backwards, Shiro widened her eyes when she realized that the ground beneath her was completely coated with a layer of ice. She sensed me through the ice. Cleaver's shadow. Shiro thought, as she didn't think she could use her ice as an extra sensory option during moments when her senses were hindered. Time to finish this, Shiro said seriously. She was going to throw everything she got at her shadow since she didn't have much mana left. Stomping down hard on the ground, Shiro caused a slab of ice to lift up in front of her as she roundhouse kicked the slab to break it into several pieces which then morphed into spears. She flicked her wrist and sent the ice spears towards her shadow while she created a dagger and a hand cannon. Bang bang. Shooting twice, which her shadow dodged with ease, Shiro watched as her shadow create a magic circle that expanded across the sky. Flinching slightly, she noticed that all the ice in the area had fallen under her shadow's control. T. Shiro muttered as everything switched targets and aimed for her. Knowing that the situation was dire, Shiro erased all emotion on her face and morphed her gun into a dagger. Twirling both daggers nimbly along her fingers, Shiro slashed apart all the ice spears that shot towards her. In-style Phantom Arts, second Phantom plus third Phantom. Gliding across the battlefield, Shiro arrived in front of her shadow, who had a slightly creepy grin that unnerved even Shiro. Asterisk boom. A dense wave of killing intent blasted her backwards, forcing her to flip her body in mid-air. Quickly looking forwards, Shiro tried to track her shadow but widened her eyes when she saw her shadow in front of her with a nanotech sword piercing towards her eyes. Faded snow movement. However, the shadow wasn't fazed by the fact that her attack missed and instead glided the sword downwards to attack the non-affected areas. But Shiro was given enough time to clasp her hands and set off an explosion of ice in front of her, which forced the two of them apart. Gracelessly rolling across the ground, she slammed her palm into the ground and shifted onto her feet. "Okay, I have so many questions right now," Shiro said as she gritted her teeth. This trial had literally constructed a shadow that knew how to use all of her abilities to their maximum potential. Not only that, but there were spells that she had no idea she could use. Example being the ability her shadow used to take control of all the ice in the area. Unfortunately, she wasn't given the time to contemplate about her questions since her shadow decided to activate the fifth form of their martial arts. In-style Phantom Arts, fifth Phantom, soul-stealing Phantom. A dark aura enveloped her shadow, her eyes cold without emotion. Shiro frowned since fifth Phantom was a risky move of the in-style Phantom Arts, hence why she hadn't used the skill yet. The skill requires the user to give themselves up to their darkest emotions and allow that to control their bodies. Whilst this was happening, the user needed to make sure that their mind is clear and adaptive to make sure that they aren't consumed by their own phantom. When they are consumed, there is little to no chance of escape. Rather than stealing someone else's soul, your own soul is stolen from you. Not to mention, the stronger the user, the harder it is to resist the phantom. During the Shadow Temple quest, she had only managed to pull this skill off successfully once, and that was under the tutelage of Fei Ling, her teacher, friend, and subordinate in the quest. However, the power granted from the form could only be described as incredible. Not only are her senses enhanced to their limits, but 50% of her stats will also temporarily be converted to assist in pure attack and no defense. But that only happened when the system grants her the title of in-style Phantom Arts practitioner. Furrowing her brows, Shiro took a deep breath and decided to push herself to her very limits. Creating 2 hand cannons along with some nanotech armor, Shiro charged at her shadow that was trying to use fifth Phantom. Asterisk bang bang bang. Shooting at the head and other weak points, Shiro made no change in expression when she saw her shadow deflect the bullets out the air with just bare hands. Bringing her 2 guns together, she morphed them into a spear and stabbed towards the shadow. With the added pressure of trying to survive Shiro's relentless pursuit and trying to activate fifth Phantom, her shadow started to lose her advantage. However, Shiro didn't loosen up her attack even when victory was close at hand because she knew how easy it was to turn the tables the moment the fifth Phantom was activated. The final blow. She thought when she saw her shadow forcefully stop the activation of fifth Phantom. Unfortunately for her, the shadow only smiled with glee. A horrendous aura exploded around her as Shiro could see a giant magic circle activating all around her. The power of the magic circle far outstripped her strongest skill in her arsenal, which was Frozen Slumber. The power rivaled that of Tier 3 spells, which should have been impossible with her broken links. "You've constructed this from the start of the battle?" Shiro muttered in shock. With small Tier 1 and Tier 2 magic circles piling on top of each other since the start of the battle, it was no wonder it could exceed the power of Tier 3. Not to mention, she had plenty of time to take breaks in between to soothe her links. Gritting her teeth, Shiro stabbed towards her shadow one last time before the spell could activate. Seeing the shadow dodge, she converted a part of the spear into a hand cannon and fired it. Asterisk bang. Unfortunately for her, the bullet missed the head and instead blasted the ear off. Asterisk boom. Just as she missed her shot, a giant blizzard smashed downwards into her as if it was the wrath of an ice god. Each snowflake that touched her would freeze her body before shattering into shards of ice. Asterisk bang. Gah. She was forced out of her trial and smashed against the tree, which caused her to spit out a mouthful of blood. Panting heavily, Shiro could feel that she was on the verge of fainting. Outsmarted and outperformed by my shadow, she frowned before blacking out. URG. Groaning slightly from the pain she was feeling, Shiro forced her eyes open, albeit with some difficulty. HM? I'm in the camp, she muttered as she looked around her. She saw that she was alone right now with no one inside the tent. Huh. She sighed heavily. She couldn't believe that she had just been outsmarted and outperformed by her own shadow. Since her shadow could use all of her abilities along with the same combat experience, it meant that whatever the shadow did, she could do as well. Seems like I haven't fully understood my potential as a mage, Shiro thought, since her shadow was a better mage than her. Not only was her shadow able to cast a tier 3 magic without problem, but she was also able to combine her skills together in ways she had never thought of. Even a random hobby she picked up, such as the flute, was combined with cold illusions to disorientate her. Sitting in silence for a while, Shiro narrowed her eyes. Since the shadow is a copy of me, whatever she can do, I can do as well, she muttered. If she was defeated by her shadow, it meant that she wasn't fighting to the best of her ability. She checked her system and noticed that the 5th star up had a cooldown after failure. She needed to wait 3 days before she could try the trial again. 3 days should be enough for me to improve. Standing up from her bed, Shiro flinched a little from the pain in her joints. Moving body around, she found that her body was mostly damaged around the joint areas. Clutching her fists, Shiro decided to try practice some of her combat skills that she had slacked on once she recovered. Naturally, she wanted to improve her close quarters combat the most. During the fight, while she could hold her own against her shadow, she could tell that she was a little better in her usage of the blades, meaning she wasn't utilizing her full power with bladed weapons. The trial seems to show me what I am currently capable of with my body. What I saw in the trial was me at my best. Seems like I've been slacking, Shiro mused to herself as she exited the tent. When she exited the tent, she saw Kane practicing diligently by the side. Sweat dripped off her body as she was currently practicing different poses to increase her flexibility. Shirone, you shouldn't be out right now, Kane cried out in surprise when she saw Shiro. Breaking her pose, she jogged over and started to examine Shiro's body. I'm fine, Shiro smiled and patted her head. Looking towards the tree that was next to their tent, she saw the tree damaged heavily on the side, showing her where she had hit before passing out. Above that spot, In was sleeping as usual. You're not fine. Mum went out to buy some medicine when she saw you puking out blood by the tree. Kane frowned. Let's wait for her then. I'll watch you practice. Shiro walked over to the tree and sat down. Kane nodded her head excitedly since she wanted to impress Shiro. While Shiro watched Kane stretch and push her flexibility to the limit, she realized that Kane had always been utilizing 100% of her effort. This led her to realize one of her mistakes. I don't know enough about my own arsenal, along with the fact that I underestimated my shadow, she thought while smiling wearily. Since her shadow was her at 100% performance, why did she expect to defeat herself with only 80% of her effort? I knew it was a shadow of myself with all my skills and nothing else. If I had fully studied my skills, I could have entered the fight with an all-out offensive and end the fight quickly, she thought with a shake of her head. Watching Kane practice, Shiro couldn't help herself and also wanted to practice. Pinching her fingers together, Shiro created an ice flute. Cold illusions is great during a fight, which can also pair well with my killing intent. If I mix the two together, I'll be able to apply tones of mental pressure. Twirling the flute between her fingers, Shiro brought it to her lips and started to play a melody she remembered from the internet. Her mind had stored the way on how to play it along with the finger placements. Kane paused hearing the melody but widened her eyes when she saw several Shiros around the tree. 3 were sitting on the branches while 4 more were sitting around the tree. What Kane didn't know was that the area around Shiro was currently drenched in killing intent. Shiro was concentrating hard on trying to restrain her passive ability so that it didn't freeze everything she touched. Since it's a passive, I should have some control over it. Since it matches the output of my killing intent, it means the power should be controllable using other sources. She thought as ice was slowly expanding outwards. Feeling the pain suddenly shoot through her body, Shiro flinched and stopped the melody. When the melody stopped, her illusions also faded away. Breathing heavily for a short moment, Shiro frowned for a moment before looking at Kane. "I'll be right back." Entering the tent, Shiro made sure that she was alone before using Fire of Life to start healing herself. Feeling the soothing energy that was currently flowing through her body, Shiro relaxed and allowed the fire to heal her body little by little. Naturally, due to the ridiculous MP consumption, Shiro knew she probably couldn't heal her internal injuries in one go. While she was relaxing, she remembered about a few questions she had in the fight. How did Shadow sense me through the ice? Then there's also the problem of her taking control of my ice during the fight. She muttered. She didn't know what her shadow had done to control the ice she had created, but she knew it would be possible for her since her shadow performed the task. The only question left is how. Thinking about all the cases she knew about taking control of someone else's element during her past life, Shiro was disappointed when she found that none of them fit the scenario she had experienced. Contemplating for a while, she suddenly realized a huge misconception she fell into. Since I'm a snow girl, a monster known for their attunement with ice and snow, I should have control over all the ice-related elements in my area. Because I'm no longer a human, human logic hardly applies to me anymore. Humans need to train and fight to level up while I, a monster, can get a certain amount of EXP by eating mana stones, just like Een who leveled 5 times through eating a C-class stone. I need to change my thought process to match my current body. Monsters can outperform humans in many ways. I'm just not taking advantage of that, she muttered in realization. What her shadow had taken advantage of the most was her skill tree she received from being a snow girl. The only time she used her Snowmancer class was to match up with her. So in other words, I've only increased my weaknesses by being so fixated with my second class all this time, huh? Shiro chuckled slightly in disappointment. She had severely underestimated her combat potential with her class. Being so focused on her previous class caused her to neglect the fact that she was hindering herself by not training with her race class. Snowmancer wasn't supposed to be a low-level class to begin with. The fact that she was even allowed to create her gun right now was somewhat of a miracle in itself. By being so fixated on using her guns, which is weakened to begin with due to her low level, she had robbed herself of her potential as a level 45 monster. My main focus will be to understand what's at my disposal for my Snow Girl class. Once I know what I can do, I'll be able to predict what Shadow will do, Shiro said whilst putting out the fire. Leaving the tent, Shiro gestured for Kane to come over to her. What is it, Shiro-ne? Do you want to play a game? What game? Kane asked excitedly. We'll play hide and seek, but you'll be hiding inside some ice. To make it harder for me, I won't be allowed to look. Shiro smiled. She wanted to use this to try sense people through her ice like what her shadow did. Oh, okay. Are there any prizes? Well, if I don't find you, you win a day out where we can do whatever you want. Shiro offered. Deal. Seeing that Kane had agreed, Shiro cleared some space around her and placed her palm on the floor. *KRRR. A small ice tower started to construct itself with a myriad of cupboards and crevices for Kane to hide herself in. The overall length and width of the tower wasn't big, but the height was another question. The sudden appearance of an ice tower confused the surrounding adventurers for a moment before they ignored it. Since they see people using spells every day, the sudden appearance of an ice tower wasn't too unusual. I'll give you 30 seconds to hide yourself before I come looking for you. Pulling out a blindfold, Shiro placed it over her eyes and made sure that she couldn't see anything. I'll start counting once I sit down in the middle of the first room. Got it. Walking towards the tower, Shiro used her hearing to point her in the direction. Sitting herself down, she secretly made a pair of earbuds that completely blocked out the sound around her. All she could hear was her own breathing and heartbeat. Placing her hands down onto the ice, Shiro calmed her mind down and wondered about what she could do to sense Kane. Her first idea was to use mana. If she was to connect her mana through the ice, She should be able to sense things that way, but she knew that wasn't what her shadow had done. What she had done was more instinctive and faster than slowly infuse mana into the ice. I'm a snow girl. I should have complete control over the ice around me. 30 seconds passed by quickly as it was time for her to look for Kane, but she didn't move. 2 minutes passed, and Kane was wondering about why Shiro hadn't moved yet. 5 minutes passed as she got a little impatient. However, before she could leave her hiding spot, she saw Shiro stand up slowly. Tilting her head back a little, Shiro realized that after being robbed of her sight and hearing, she was in a state of enhanced sensory where her feeling of touch was increased alongside her mana sense. When paired with 5 minutes of complete focus, she noticed how the building was completely connected to her with blank spots that show the contact of something foreign. That's Kane's hiding spot. Shiro smiled. Since controlling ice was her passive skill as a monster, sensing the changes to the ice would have been instinctive to begin with. All she needed was a little time and focus for her to grasp it. Kane was getting a little nervous when Shiro started to walk up the stairs without problem. Not to mention, she was even looking towards her hiding spot right now. An idea popped into her head as she tiptoed out her spot and started to hide herself elsewhere. What she didn't know was that every step of hers was akin to a spot of black on a white sheet of paper. Tracking Kane easily, Shiro arrived in front of her. Surprised? Shiro smiled and lifted up her blindfolds. While she did this, she didn't forget to disassemble her earplugs as well. Kane only pouted, feeling a little annoyed that she can't have her day out. Seeing Kane pout, Shiro's heart softened. I'll take you out anyways, don't worry. I have 3 days spare for now. Shiro typed out. Really? Kane cried out in excitement. What are you girls doing? Yumi shouted out from under the tower. She had just returned from buying Shiro some medicine, and she saw both Shiro and Kane high up in an ice tower. I'm playing hide and seek with Shirone. Kane replied. Don't be naughty. Your Shirone need to recover. She is very hurt. Yumi frowned. Let's go. We'll play tomorrow when we have more time. Fine. Walking down the tower, Shiro thawed all the ice as Yumi showed her the medicine. Mum said that these potions will help soothe your body and help speed up your recovery. Kane translated. Thank you very much. How much did they cost? Shiro asked as she didn't want to be in debt. She said to forget about it. Think of it as payment for teaching me. Kane smiled whilst rolling around. Kane, don't roll around. Yumi frowned a little. But Mum Shirone is going to be playing with me all day tomorrow. Kane replied as she couldn't wait. She was going to get Shiro to take her exploring everywhere around the city since she never got the chance to. Seeing her excitement, Shiro smiled softly. She had 3 days till the trials were fresh. In those 3 days, she needed to increase her mastery over her main class, Snow Girl, along with explore more options available to her with her current arsenal without the use of her Snowmancer class. Of course, spending a day with Kane wasn't much of a problem. If anything, she could delay her trial a little since she could continuously challenge it as long as she doesn't reach level 50. Otherwise, she'll lose her qualification to challenge her 5th star due to the class upgrade. After spending the entire day with Kane, which mostly consisted of just walking around the whole city and exploring some of the shops that they hadn't been to, they started to make their way back to the camp. Watching Kane's childish curiosity, Shiro felt like she wanted to just pamper her like an older sister. And naturally, as her older sister, she needed to make sure that her little sister can protect herself. I should probably buy some martial arts manuals or something similar, she thought to herself. Thankfully, she didn't need to worry about dangers since there weren't any auctions anytime soon. She could buy items without worrying about fighting people. Thinking of this point, Shiro couldn't help but sigh at the auction system. Anyone who buys an item at the auction is pretty much putting their lives on the line. A risk they knew was there but still took. Therefore, they couldn't blame anyone if they died trying to keep the item. Shiro made sure that she warned Kane about the dangers that she may have to face after she becomes a qualified adventurer. However, she was still wondering about what class Kane would choose. I want to be a katana user, Kane said after some thought. Ohaya? A katana user, huh? I guess I can modify the blood katanas I got from the dungeon and give it to Kane as an insurance, I guess. Shiro thought since she had no use for the katanas to begin with, she might as well put it to good use and give it to Kane. Why katana user? Shiro asked curiously. It's because I love katanas. The legend around katanas are filled with wonder. I just wish that one day I can find a legendary katana that will cut everything with ease just like in the stories. Kane giggled happily. Patting her head, Shiro nodded her head slightly since it reminded her of her childhood. There were always kids that wanted to be like the adventurers and knights that had appeared in their village. However, her dream was always just to live a peaceful life in the village. Even though she was curious of the outside world, she knew the dangers it presented. How I've changed, huh? Shiro thought in nostalgia. If someone told her to live peacefully now, she would reject that thought since she liked to explore and get her blood pumping through battles. Naturally, a little killing here and murder there was always welcome. Walking back with Kane, Shiro sat on top of the tree and looked towards the city. It had been a whole day, but Lyrica and Madison hadn't returned yet. If she had to guess the days they've been inside the dungeon, it would be roughly almost a month. On the other hand, she hadn't felt any changes from the tags she had left on their bodies, which meant that they weren't in any serious danger. A Nigerian Nairobi. Since they weren't in any serious danger, she was going to give it another day's time. If they hadn't returned by then, it would be a serious concern. All right, I need a training plan for these 2 days. Shiro muttered in seriousness. She could narrow down several aspects in which her shadow was superior to her. Number 1. Spell casting. Her shadow had better understanding about her ice and were able to do more with the power she had been granted. Example being the spell she used to take control of all the ice in the area, even the ones that wasn't created by her. Number 2. Understanding of skills. The shadow was able to use her skills to their maximum potential, even with skills that she barely used such as the cold illusions. And finally, number 3. She understood her capabilities. Her shadow knew what she could and couldn't do. It was also that fact which allowed her to counter Shiro every step of the way and even have the time to construct a tier 3 spell which Shiro didn't think she could do. If she didn't improve in these 3 areas, there was little to no chance of beating her shadow. However, there was an anomaly that will allow her to beat her shadow without improving in these 3 areas. 5th Phantom. Shiro muttered with a frown. The unpredictable anomaly that will heighten her senses to the max and reach a stage normally not attainable by the normal human. Even her shadow wasn't able to use her 5th Phantom successfully. If she was to gamble in the trial, should she activate it successfully, she would be able to overwhelm her shadow easily. But I'm not allowed to master it, since it would mean my shadow will be able to master it as well. Shiro frowned. The fact that her shadow knew what she knew and perhaps more since they could demonstrate 100% of her combat potential was a hurdle that was almost impossible to beat. Normal adventurers would be lucky if they could demonstrate even 60% of their potential, while the talented and hardworking would reach 75% to 80%. Even Shiro in her prime could only demonstrate up to 97% of her maximum, and that was with perfect body control. In her current state, if she was lucky, she'll be able to touch upon 85%, maybe 90% if she really pushed it. But the likelihood of reaching the famed 90% mark was going to be extremely hard in her current state. To beat a version of yourself that performs at 100%, huh? No wonder it's the 5th star trial. Normal people, even if they managed to crawl their way to the 4th star, would be stuck at this point. No matter what they learn, no matter what skills they obtain, if they can't perform up to the 90% mark, they would never pass this chance. Shiro spoke softly. Ha ha ha. And even then, the 90% mark will only give you a fighting chance. Nothing more, nothing less. Shiro chuckled. In her attempt, she had reached around 83% performance and used her combat experience to guide her along the way. Without these 2 factors, not only will she lose the fight, but she would also lose her important anal virginity. Thinking of this point, Shiro couldn't help but cover her rear and frown. To think she would copy habits as well. Shiro muttered in annoyance. Naturally, this wouldn't stop her from targeting the weakness. Since I can't rely on an anomaly like the 5th Phantom, I should aim to improve on the 3 areas. Tomorrow will be practice on spell casting and skill knowledge. The final day would be to familiarize myself with my body and try to perform up to the 90% mark, Shiro thought as she finalized her training plan for the next 2 days. While there was the choice of entering the dungeon to increase her training time, she needed to wait for Lyrica and Madison, along with the fact that she wanted to keep an eye on the camp. If she wasn't here, the tent would be defenseless. While her little murder streak had caused the slums to calm down a little, it was only a temporary patch. It wasn't a permanent solution. Sooner or later, they will retaliate. Narrowing her eyes, Shiro decided to go scouting tonight. She was going to enter one of the core areas that belongs to the factions and gain some intel. Glancing at the time, she saw that she still had roughly an hour till sunset. An hour to prepare myself is plenty of time. Shiro smiled. Even though her body was still a little sore and hurt around the joints, she could use the hour to heal her body further. Looking at the emerald fire that flickered whilst healing her, Shiro couldn't help but be grateful about the fact that she obtained the combustion spell and had met Reina in the trial. Meeting her had given Shiro the chance to learn this skill. She decided to take Ian along with her since she might as well take this time to earn Ian some EXP should they be fighting people. Glancing at Yin's level, Shiro smiled slightly in anticipation. Currently, Ian was level 43 and soon approaching level 45. There is the chance that she'll learn a new skill at level 45 and hopefully, it would make Ian a more dependable companion in the dungeons. After waiting for the sun to set, Shiro told Kane that she was leaving for a bit before exiting the tent. Pulling up her face mask, Shiro hid the bottom half of her face and created a hood to hide her hair. Her body flickered for a moment before disappearing from her spot. In a single moment, she jumped high into the air from her spot by using a combination of Faded Snow movement, Second Phantom, Third Phantom, and Rift Walker. Landing softly on one of the tallest buildings, Shiro brought up the mental map she created during her previous exploration of the slums. From her memories, one of the factions were creating a drug similar to a drug dubbed as Arpike. The drug was potent enough to make level 50 addicted, and naturally, the new drug would be just as dangerous. The faction responsible for this was Ivory Cobra, the most dangerous faction of the three. If I aimed for the largest faction, I should be able to get more intel, she muttered, eventually deciding on targeting Ice Fangs first. They had the best combat power along with the most amount of territory in the slums. Out of the three, she should be able to gain the most information from them. Of course, this didn't mean she was going to leave the other two out. Oh no, all three were going to be investigated. After all, she couldn't have trash running amok near her little sister, could she? Making her way to the territory belonging to the Ice Fangs, Shiro was able to avoid the lookouts with her first phantom. Jumping over the edge of the building, Shiro quickly looked for an open window before flicking her wrist and sent out a wire made from nanobots. Hanging just under the opening, Shiro used Shadow Cloak to hide herself before creating a nanotech sonic locator which used sound to show her what was inside the room. 3 guards in total, huh? She thought. She wasn't going to kill them since it will create a domino effect and could render all the intel useless. Reeling herself up with the wire, Shiro entered the rift and vaulted over the window. Crouching behind one of the furniture, Shiro exited the rift and used Shadow Cloak to hide her presence. Glancing at their levels, Shiro narrowed her eyes when she saw that they were only in their level 30s. I'm not too sure about my capabilities with cold illusion right now, so I shouldn't risk it, she thought to herself since she had the idea of hypnotizing them with her skill. Due to the fact that the skill simulated what effect she imagined, she should be able to hypnotize them but didn't want to risk it. I'll kidnap one of them tonight and use them for some experiments later. Entering the rift, she left the room with ease. Making sure that no one was around her, Shiro placed the nanotech sonic locator on the walls of the building before letting it do its work to scan the entire building. There are 2 basements underground. I can probably find some info on the highest floor and in these basements. Disassembling the locator, Shiro made her way up to the highest floor first. Avoiding the guards around the floors, Shiro was able to enter the highest room with relative ease. However, she saw that there was a person inside the room working on some paperwork. Not only that, there was also a safe next to him. She had seen him place a few documents in the safe before locking it up. Shiro frowned when she saw this since it would be easy for her to hack the computer system for the intel, but physical copies were harder to obtain, especially with the person next to it. Furrowing her brows for a moment, Shiro had an idea and turned to Een. I want you to rift walk into the safe. Around you should be a bunch of documents. Grab all of them before rift walking back. Make sure you don't make too much sound inside the safe. Shiro whispered. Een nodded her head. Her body flickered into the rift before flickering back in a few short moments. In her mouth was several documents. Good girl. Shiro praised and handed her a lollipop. Een smiled in satisfaction and started to enjoy her treat. Glancing at the documents, Shiro smiled when she saw that there were some times for shipments of cargo written onto the pieces of paper. Flicking through the rest of the documents quickly, Shiro knew she had to return them before he opened the safe again. Can you help me put them back into the safe? Shiro asked. Even though it was a question, both she and Een knew she wasn't taking no for an answer. Nodding her head, Een took the files back before he noticed. Before they leave, however, Shiro wanted to see what the person had on the laptop just in case she missed something important. Pressing her fingers against the door frame, she created a thin nanotech wire that slowly slivered towards the laptop cables. Connecting to the laptop, Shiro closed her eyes for a moment and started to hack into the laptop without any of the protection systems noticing. However, when she connected successfully and saw the tab he was on whilst writing documents, Shiro had the sudden urge to flip a table. Why are you watching P*** whilst working? Resisting the urge to charge into the room, Shiro ignored the image she had just seen and started to search the computer for important documents. However, there was nothing of use. Clicking her tongue, Shiro stood up and entered the rift. Controlling her body so that she fell through the floor, she landed in the first underground basement in this building. Crouching down, she looked around her to make sure that the coast was clear. The basement was dimly lit with several crates lined up with codes painted on the side. According to the schedule, all of these are supposed to be shipped tomorrow, Shiro thought. Making a filter in her face mask in case of chemicals, she carefully opened one of the crates. Inside laid several layers of test tubes that were surrounded with padding. The test tubes contained a clear blue liquid while a metal stand kept all the test tubes upright. Could this be the drug? She thought with a frown. Grabbing one of the test tubes, Shiro inspected it. Unknown solution. A never-before-seen solution that may or may not be harmful. Why is something that belongs to the ivory cobra here in the territory of the Ice Fangs? She thought with suspicion. The worst part of this was that the Ice Fangs seemed to be in the dark about this. Seems like there are rats in the Ice Fangs that sold the faction out to the ivory cobra. Holding the test tube in her left hand, Shiro flexed her right hand as several strands of metal started to twine together. After a short moment, she created a chemical analyzer that should allow her to see what the drug's effects were. While she let the machine scan the drug, Shiro started to look around the basement but only found test tubes containing the clear blue liquid and nothing else. Furrowing her brows, Shiro wondered what they were going to do with such a large supply of the drugs. *Ding. A soft ringing sound rang out, informing Shiro about the contents of the liquid. Reading its effects, Shiro frowned. Has effects of increasing a person's power greatly but in return will amplify their thirst for battle. Side effects can vary, with the most common being an insatiable thirst for more of the same drug. If they aren't provided the drug within 10 hours' time, they will begin to rampage with severe cases of muscle swelling and boils that will appear randomly through the body. If not given the drug in 24 hours, they will claw themselves to death from the pain. Rango Epsilon S. Users below level 50 will not be able to resist the side effects. Shiro muttered with a frown. Taking a deep breath, Shiro wondered about what she should do. The main problem was the fact that there were tons more of this drug, and she didn't know where they were produced, and nor did she know about the other locations where they're hiding the drug. Not only that, she didn't even know if this was the only drug type they had. There could be other variants. I should see what's in the second basement first, Shiro thought to herself. She had an idea of how she could stop this, but she needed more evidence first. Making a phone, she took a picture of the entire basement along with the drugs. Her idea was to gather enough evidence so that she could force the government to make a move. If they didn't, she'll publish the evidence along with a recording of the effects on a test subject. That way, she could force the adventurers to make a move along with the three big families. Making her way to the second basement, she saw that there were more of the same drug. Thankfully, the drug isn't diffusible through the air. Otherwise, it would be on the level of a Tier 4 disaster when placed in a low-level city like this one. Shiro thought in relief. Thankfully, the drug's effects disappear when dispersed in the air. Entering the rift, Shiro jumped out of the building one go before reappearing in the sky. Glancing down at the slums, she narrowed her eyes since there were a lot of buildings she needed to scour through before she has enough evidence. Not only that, she was going to make a digital map of the area. Tracing her finger in the air, she created a laptop whilst falling. Landing with 2 soft taps, Shiro made a drone and threw it up into the air. A map was slowly being constructed on the laptop with her current building colored red. The other buildings were colored in a slightly translated blue that contrasted against the red. She was going to construct a map so that when she does pass on the information, they'll be able to close in on it as quick as possible. Naturally, with the size of the slums, she would need several days to explore the entirety of the area, which is why she wasn't going to give them the full map. She was going to force them to attack the entirety of the slums to make sure the drug is contained. There was the chance that the government will use the drug instead. However, it wasn't her problem since it will give the other governments a wake-up call to be more thorough with their selections in case of corruption. She wasn't a strategist, so she didn't have all the answers. But in theory, this would be better than letting the slums keep this dangerous drug. Shiro spent the next few hours looking through buildings from all 3 factions and managed to dig up some dirt on all 3. Ivory Cobra are responsible for the dangerous drugs and had managed to sink their teeth into the territories of the other factions. She didn't know how, but around 5% of the Ice Fangs were taken over while the Jade Sharks were worse with 15% being taken. To make matters worse, no one knew about this. They still think the buildings are under their control, but the reality of the situation was different. However, the Ivory Cobra wasn't the only one acting with large plans. The Ice Fangs had been developing themselves in other towns nearby, so their manpower were constantly expanding. Especially in the town of Huxton, the faction had practically taken over the town at this point. And with that, they've started to set up a dark alliance of sorts with a mysterious backer who none of the lower echelons knew about. As for Jade Sharks, they had been sneaking strong adventurers from overseas to help them combat the Ice Fangs. With all 3 making big moves in the dark, the government would have no other choice apart from eradicating them. Looking her map that had been highlighted with spots of red, Shiro started to add tags to all of them before compressing it into several info chips. Looking at one of the patrol men that belonged to the Ivory Cobras, she decided to take him for her experiments. Let them have a taste of their own medicine. Literally. Jumping into the rift, she appeared beside him and knocked him out easily by backhanding the side of his head. Asterisk bang. Slamming against the wall, the man dropped in a slump. I didn't kill him by accident, did I? Shiro muttered as she walked over to him and crouched down. Picking him up, she saw that he was still alive and sighed in relief. Carrying him by the scruff of his neck, Shiro dragged him to her lab that she had created in an abandoned building. Well, calling it a lab would be a push since it was just an empty room with some tables and chairs. Throwing the man on the chair, Shiro pulled out a vial that contained the drug. She snapped her fingers and created a camera to film the entire process. Creating some wires that tied around the man's body, she started to tighten them to wake the man up. Arg! Huh! Where am I? He cried out in a panic. When he saw Shiro in front of him, he was first in a daze. However, before he can even continue to look at her, Shiro stabbed both his eyes with her fingers and gauged them out of his eye sockets. Humph! Scoffing slightly, she flicked her hand and threw the eyes away. Ah! The man screamed in pain from having his eyes gouged out. Grabbing his neck, Shiro stopped him from screaming and poured the drug in his mouth. His body convulsed a little before his veins started to bulge up. Even though he was only level 35, his strength was almost comparable to the strength of a level 50. However, even though that was the case, he was easily restrained by Shiro's wires. All she needed to do was flex her fingers a little before he started to squirm in the chair. He couldn't use his skills either since the wires were constantly devouring any mana he used to power a skill. Turning on the recording, Shiro had 24 hours until the results of the experiment will show. I'll deposit the intel tomorrow when I got the recordings, she muttered as she set up several traps and locks around the place so that no one can disturb her experiment. Furrowing her brows from the screaming in the background, Shiro flicked her hand and created a mouth gag that blocked out the sound. Leaving her lab, Shiro made her way back to the tent. She will be training her spell casting and skill knowledge after all. The best way for this will be self-study, along with a small lecture with Aram if possible. Since she could cast Tier 3 magic with ease, she should be able to learn something from her. ####. Waking up early in the morning, Shiro saw both Lyrica and Madison back at the tent. Smiling in relief, she left the tent and started to list out her skills that she could use in the trial. I could use my entire Snow Girl skill tree, which consisted of Tier 2 Ice Magic, Snow Magic, Faded Snow Movement, Cold Aura, Icy Touch, Icy Breath, Frozen Hell series, and Cold Illusions. Others are passives. I also had access to all of Yin's skills, not to mention Tier 2 Lightning, Metal, and Shadow Magic. While I do have my Snowmancer skill tree, the Shadow hardly uses it, but I shouldn't cross it off the list either. Shiro mumbled to herself as she started to make a list in her mind. She decided to categorize her magic into 3 sections: offensive, defensive, and synergistic. Her best skills in the offensive category would be her hand cannon creation, lightning magic, icy touch, and frozen hell series. Defensive will be her ice magic, armor creation, metal magic, absorption/redirection, and riftwalker, While absorption/redirection was only at Tier 1, everything that will help her in the battle was welcome. The final category was synergistic, and it was one of the aspects where her shadow excelled at. In this category, she had included the skills Cold Illusions, Ice Chains, and Combust. While Combust was a fire-type skill, she was able to use it to create both the Fire of Life and the Azure Hellfire. Since her weakness was fire, her shadow's weakness should also be fire. Weakness, huh? She muttered. However, her eyes slowly widened when she realized the possibility of an option she hadn't considered before. Whatever she excelled at, her shadow also excelled at. Therefore, it also meant whatever her weakness were, are also her shadow's weakness. And her greatest weakness that had plagued her mind. Mana links, she muttered in realization. Since her shadow's mana links were in the same condition, it meant that she can break them during the fight. The only question is how she was going to break the mana links. There weren't many known ways to break mana links since most people would just kill the enemy unless they really wanted them to suffer. However, even though she knew of the ways, she couldn't experiment with this idea right now. Otherwise, her shadow would also know of the final product of her experiments. Her best bet was to finalize the skill and the theory inside the trial. That way, her shadow will be clueless about this. But if she fails this time, the next time she fought her shadow, it would only be annoyed due to the fact that her shadow will have access to the mana link breaker. Her next fight will be akin to an all-or-nothing situation. Of course, it was all possible due to the fact that she had rearranged her links with the help of the mana springs. This gave her the chance to break them apart, and the rampaging energy should devastate her shadow's body, leaving her severely weakened. Storing the idea in the corner of her mind for now, Shiro started to figure out ways she could combine her skills. Unfortunately for her, her mind kept drifting back to the mana link idea. URG. Groaning in annoyance, Shiro sighed since the thought of being able to develop a mana link breaking skill made her want to finalize it as soon as possible. During the day, she tried to contact Aram about teaching her magic, but it was unfortunate that she was a little busy right now and couldn't teach her. Since she's busy, I guess I'll go to this city's Mages Association and fight some people in the simulation, she muttered. She was going to use everything apart from her Snowmancer skill tree. If she was to fight people higher rank than her with only her magic, it should help her increase her mastery over the skills. Making her way to the city, Shiro arrived at the Mages Guild. The design of the guild wasn't unlike the one she had seen back in New York. Only this time, the size of the building was a little larger. "Excuse me, where can I find the simulation pods to fight other mages?" Shiro asked the man at the counter. "Fifth floor, second room on the right," he replied after a short pause. If you want, I can show you the way." Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro shook her head. "No, thank you." Seeing her walk away, the man couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. Upon arriving at the fifth floor, Shiro was slightly surprised at the amount of level 50s walking around. Well, I suppose it makes sense since it's a higher level city. Looking around, Shiro entered the second room on the right and saw several rows of pods with people inside. "Ohaya? Seems like a lot of people are fighting today," Shiro muttered. It didn't take her long to find a vacant pod and sat inside it. She needed to scan her ID card to make sure she was a mage. Flexing her fingers, she sent a strand of nanobots to tamper with the pod so that she could hide her data. She closed her eyes and soon found herself inside the plaza of the simulated world. There were several rooms around her that had screens that showed the fight inside. Where do I find random opponents? She wondered whilst searching through her command panel. Finding the tag for matchmaking 1v1, Shiro waited for the system to find her someone to fight. Whilst waiting, she decided to have a look at one of the screens in hopes of getting some ideas. The fight she was watching was a fight between two level 35s. Spell circles were being constructed one after another as they would make defensive spells and offensive spells. It wasn't anything too remarkable as Shiro could deal with it easily. Opponent found. Entering area. Seeing the notification, Shiro took a deep breath. She wasn't going to use any close quarters combat but instead focused solely on using her spells. A light enveloped her body as she was teleported away. Looking at the display, she saw that her opponent was also a level 45 mage. But unlike her ice element, she was a fire element. Jenna LVL 45, fire mage. "Ohaya? I'm against a cutie, huh?" The woman smiled confidently. "Not many are ice mages since it's rather weak. I guess it's your unlucky day," she snickered slightly. Everyone knew that ice mages were primarily control-type mages that focused on applying status effects and using defensive spells. While high-level ice mages were dangerous, low-level mages were a pushover, especially for a fire mage like her. Nui. Shiro only raised an eyebrow since the woman was doing something no one should do. Underestimate an opponent in a 1v1 fight. Shiro had the urge to attack with ice swords, but decided to hold herself back from going into close-ranged combat. Ding. The bell for the match rang out as Shiro jumped backwards and aimed her palm at Jenna. Snap. However, before she could even use her spell, 3 magic circles appeared around her. Furrowing her brows, Shiro lowered her palm and swiped around her, erecting a wall of ice to protect her. Bang bang bang. Blocking the 3 fire attacks, Shiro jumped into the rift and appeared beside Jenna. Huh. Crying out in surprise, Jenna created a magic circle under her and erupted fire around her. Shiro quickly used Fated Snow movement to jump back. Tisk. She clicked her tongue. Normally, she would have just used Frozen Slumber to instant kill her, but to understand her other skills better, she had to limit herself. Pinching her fingers together, Shiro created a flute and brought it to her lips. Jenna was confused about the sudden melody but widened her eyes when she realized her surroundings had changed into a frozen forest with white mist creeping towards her from the edges. Flicking her wrist so that 2 magic circles appeared in her hands, Jenna frowned and looked around her for any signs of Shiro. Here! She shouted out and blasted one of Shiro's clone illusions. The destruction of the illusion caused cold mist to cover Jenna's arm and freeze it. Che! Burn! She commanded as fire erupted around her body, making her seem like a fire spirit. "You know, I didn't think you'll give me such trouble considering the fact that my element counter's yours. But in the end, I'll still win," she said with a serious face. Raising her hand into the sky, she created a 2-layered magic circle that shot out fire arrows around her, disrupting Shiro's illusion. However, Shiro was able to avoid it with ease and was about to charge at her for close quarters combat. Restraining herself, Shiro flicked the flute upwards and clutched her fist. A two-fold magic circle appeared around the flute, transforming it into a giant spear that shot towards Jenna. Narrowing her eyes, Jenna raised two fingers towards the spear and sliced upwards. Asterisk boom. Fire erupted upwards and encased the spear. Unfortunately for Jenna, the fire wasn't powerful enough to melt her ice. Widening her eyes in shock, Jenna decided to go all out. Jumping upwards, 5 nodes of fire appeared around her and wrapped her entire body. So she's using her elemental armor. Shiro thought whilst aiming her palm at Jenna and clutched it. For magic circles encased Jenna and attempted to freeze her fire. But before the spell could even activate, the fire exploded around Jenna and shattered the spell circles. Backing off from the force, Shiro cursed inwardly about her slow cast time. It takes too long for her spells to actually activate, which then gives her opponent an opening. Watching the fire shrink, she saw Jenna in a red dress that had the edges transition into fire which flickered with every movement. In her hands was an orb that flickered with a yellow flame. So her elemental weapon is a casting orb, huh? Shiro thought with a frown. A casting orb would increase a mage's cast time and spell power by a pretty significant margin, which only spelled trouble for her. Shimmering with a bright yellow light, the orb in Jenna's hand floated upwards as several magic circles fused together to form a 3-fold circle, the symbol of a Tier 3 spell. Smiling slightly, Shiro had been preparing her own 3-fold spell since the beginning of the battle. Using her left hand to grab the wrist of her right hand, Shiro gritted her teeth and sped up the construction of her own Tier 3 spell. *KSH, KSH, KSH. Sparks flew around as her magic circle appeared in the sky, covering the entire arena in its shadow. When she had used cold illusions, she had masked the presence of her Tier 3 spell so that Jenna wouldn't have realized. Looking up in shock, Jenna didn't know what to say. Each of the layers of the spell represented a different element. The outermost ring was dark purple in color, representing the shadow element. This would allow the spell to absorb the mana from attacks to a certain degree and construct itself faster using that mana. The second ring was lightning that would increase the destructive of the spell. The last and final part of the magic circle, the core, was neon blue in color, which represented her main element, ice. Twisting her right hand clockwise, the circle followed her motion as each layer started to rotate against one another. Shadow and ice turned clockwise while lightning turned anti-clockwise. Die! Jenna panicked and quickly redirected her own Tier 3 spell towards Shiro. Heh. Grinning slightly, Shiro stomped down and created a metal dome around her which tried its best to resist the fire. 4 elements? The sight of Shiro being able to use 4 elements shocked Jenna, since not many could achieve this feat. However, her shock didn't last long, since if she didn't kill Shiro now, the Tier 3 spell that was activating above her right now would kill her. Asterisk boom. Yes. Crying out in joy, Jenna cheered seeing Shiro's metal defenses blow up. Boo? Shiro whispered behind Jenna, not knowing if she could hear her or not. Placing a palm on her back, Shiro activated Icy Touch with a burst of killing intent. Asterisk KRRR. Jenna couldn't even react when she was turned to ice. To make sure that she died, Shiro pulled back her fist and punched the ice to shatter it along with Jenna. Asterisk crack. Bang. The winner. She only relaxed herself when she got the notification. During the moment when she had used her metal to defend her body, Shiro activated Rift Walker to appear behind Jenna. While it did work, she knew it would fail against her shadow, since a single use of Faded Snow movement would cause her palm to miss. This brought up her next point of concern: how she would use her mana link breaking spell if she couldn't touch her shadow. I'll need a way to disrupt her Faded Snow movement, otherwise it'll be a pain. Shiro frowned. Research about Snow Girls was a must, since there were bound to be people who had figured a way to counter the Snow Girls' Faded Snow movement. It was unfortunate that she hadn't encountered many Snow Girls in her past life, and even if she did, a single bullet to the head was the result of the fights. She didn't need to worry about the skill. Shaking her head, she decided to opt for combat against higher-level adventurers. She could deal with level 45s easily, but that wouldn't push her to her limits. Changing the matchmaking settings, Shiro waited to fight against level 50s. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. In the end, Shiro fought against level 50s for several hours. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to win every fight due to the fact that she restrained herself in order to increase her proficiency with spells. However, she did gain a small fan club which were entranced by her beauty. But once they researched about her online, they found old records of her fights back in New York and couldn't help but pale slightly. Naturally, Shiro had no knowledge of this. Exciting the pod, she gave her body a stretch and left the Mages Association. Asterisk growling. Flinching slightly at her hunger, Shiro grabbed a bunch of mana, stone lollipops, and ate them. Of course, she didn't forget about Een and fed her also. Che, seems like this Mrs. Pantry is running dry. Shiro pouted slightly when she saw only 3 mana stone lollipops left inside her inventory. Een, we'll go to a dungeon tomorrow to refill on mana stones, okay? She asked as Een nodded in excitement. Entering the dungeon meant chances of leveling up, which then meant she could enter C rank quicker. Making her way back to the slums, Shiro looked at the time and saw that she still had several hours before the 24-hour mark. What shall I do for the last few hours? She muttered, but nothing came up. Shrugging shoulders, she decided to make her way to the lab first. Arriving at the room, Shiro disabled the defenses and walked inside. Holy sweet mother of hell, what the F***? She couldn't help but curse in surprise when she saw the state of the man. He had several cases of extreme muscles, swelling to the point that it started to split apart. Boils could be seen especially around his eyes, as his hollowed eyes only made it worse since she had gouged them out the night before. Some of his body had started to break down with flesh rotting with a green and purple color. The only way she knew he was alive was due to the fact that she could see his lungs move. That right, there was a hole exposing a portion of his lungs for the naked eye. Looking at the fact that he was still alive, Shiro grinned sadistically since she was somewhat curious about how he would react to certain action under the effects of the drug. Pausing the recording, Shiro crouched in front of him and created a rob with ice. Narrowing her eyes in curiosity, Shiro poked his lungs, which caused his legs to twitch. Hee, grinning like a kid who had found a toy, Shiro decided to spend the last few hours to prod any holes she could find on his body without killing him. If anyone could hear Shiro, all would think the place was haunted, since the mixture of a happy giggle and muffled screams could be heard. After a few hours of fun, Shiro stopped since she needed to record the time up to the 24th hour where he would die from the effects. Pressing resume on the camera, Shiro sat back and waited. The closer they got to the 24th hour, the more the man's body would convulse. Once it hit the 24th hour, the man's body suddenly swelled up like a balloon. Shiro quickly made an ice wall to protect herself. Asterisk boom. Exploding into a fountain of pus and flesh, Shiro made sure that the recording was fine before sighing in relief. After a few edits, it will be perfect to distribute to the government and the higher echelon on the 3 big families. Shiro thought with a smile. The first thing that she had to do was to edit out all the parts that included her and any clues that may lead to her identity. However, before she could edit, she needed to clean everything up. Everything means the pus, blood, and flesh that was spread out around her lab. After spending a few minutes of freezing and destroying the mess, Shiro pressed her palm against her table and created a laptop. Her first task was to shorten the recording so that it was just a few seconds long. All she needed in the recording was the moments when the person's body would have the most drastic changes. What if I made it so that each hour is 2 seconds long and change it into real time at the 10-hour mark, 20-hour mark, and at the 24th hour mark? She muttered whilst her finger tapped away on the laptop. But I did pause it for the last few hours since I was having fun. She frowned. Eventually settling with the idea of edited the entire film to only show small sections every 4 hours, Shiro didn't take long to create 4 chips that held the recordings along with the maps and the intel she had gathered. Right then, the first stop will be the government building, then the 3 big families. Shiro muttered as she brought the map up and checked the locations of each of them. The closest building to me is the government building, followed by the Kasadan family, Cermak family, and finally the Ospar family. Hardest for last, huh? She thought in slight humor whilst preparing herself to break into a government building. "Een, you go back to the tent for now. The next part is dangerous and would be hard if I have you with me." Een thought for a moment before nodding and flew away. As harsh as it was, Een was a slight hindrance for her next mission. Not to mention, in a situation where she may potentially fight level 60s, she would rather not look after Een whilst trying to fight. Making sure that her face was covered with the face mask and hood, Shiro exited the building and started to make her way to the Kairosa government skyscraper. The skyscraper was around 75 stories tall and wasn't hard to miss when she looked towards the city. Glancing around to make sure that no one could see her, Shiro flicked her wrist and sent a hook upwards. Asterisk clack. It latched onto the side of the building and started to reel Shiro upwards while she used Shadow Cloak to keep herself hidden. Using 2 hooks to climb towards the top, she was able to traverse the side of the building quickly. She checked on each of the floors she passed on and found what seemed to be the main office on the 70th floor. They have 5 floors spare. Curious. Looking up at the 5 floors above her, Shiro grinned and decided to peek over the window ledges. On the 71st floor, Shiro saw a man who seemed like he was in his late 40s. While his face held some wrinkles, his body was muscular and compact with muscle. Arthur LVL 75, Arcane Warrior. Aya, so he's one of those geezers that stay in low-level cities, huh? Shiro mused. The problem with people like him was the fact that they couldn't face monsters of equal level or higher level for them to level up, in which case, it meant that they slowly succumbed to their lifespans. Her interest instantly waned since she had no curiosity regarding people who couldn't level up anymore at this low of a level. However, even though her interest had waned, she still checked out what the other 4 floors contained. A level 76, 78, 73, and 79, huh? Well, I suppose in a city where the dungeons only go up to 60, they can be called powerhouses, Shiro thought whilst climbing down the skyscraper. Kicking her body off the side of the building, Shiro entered the rift and phased through the window with ease. "Now, where shall I leave this?" she muttered while looking around. She wanted to make sure that the files are the first thing the governor sees. Thinking for a short moment, she decided to just leave it on the desk with a short note. Of course, she took precautions to make sure that it couldn't be traced back to her. Nodding in satisfaction, Shiro jumped out the window and made her way to the Kasudan family. When she arrived, she had to avoid quite a few Kasudan guards that were patrolling outside the building. Seems like they're on high alert, Shiro thought with a frown. Her guess was that they were taking extra steps to make sure that the heir of the family is safe, especially with the fact that she was injured to the point of a coma during the battle on auction night. Unsure of the floor print of this mansion since it was less straightforward when compared to the skyscraper, Shiro balanced herself on the ledges and scouted out the mansion. "Young miss, you shouldn't be up at this time. Master has specifically told you to rest well for a period of time. TSK, the healers have already healed me. Tell my old man I'm fine." A young voice replied in annoyance. "Young miss, be careful of your tone and speak. We're not outside. Why do I need to care about appearances?" "HM? Doesn't that voice belong to Alara Kasudan?" Shiro thought and peeked over the edge of the window. She saw Alara in a nightgown while 2 maids were following her. Even so, as a member of the Kasudan family, one must keep up their appearance at all times. "Like I care about that in the house. Didn't a few of our scouts bring back a tube filled with drugs? Why isn't my old man doing anything about it?" She glared at the maids. "All of us know that the drug is highly dangerous from the rumors we've heard. If we don't make a move, a lot of people will die." She continued. "It's not that the master doesn't want to make a move, but rather he can't, young miss. He simply doesn't have enough evidence, and they don't know what the drug does either. While rumors can be a source of intel, it is highly questionable." The maid bowed. "Arg!" Alara cried out in anger and punched the wall. "Coward!" she cursed. "Better safe than sorry, is it not? Or has the old man gotten senile? Is he seriously debating about whether or not he should save lives?" She gritted her teeth. "So Alara Kasudan wants to make a move against the slums, but her father doesn't want to, huh? Interesting," Shiro thought with a small smile. If she tipped Alara with the intel, she should be able to let her convince her father to mobilize the Kasidan family. As for the explanation on where she obtained the info, she could just say her scouts or secret agents attained the info. Following behind the group, Shiro kept herself hidden outside of the mansion. Eventually, the maids convinced Alara to give up for now. Watching her stomp back to her bedroom, Shiro phased through the walls and hid herself in one of the corners. URG. What to do? Alara scratched her head in annoyance as she walked around her room impatiently. As for Shiro, she couldn't reveal herself since it increases the chances of revealing her identity. However, an idea suddenly struck her mind as she pressed her palms against the floor and activated cold illusions. Alara instantly went on guard when she realized her surroundings had changed. A paper note suddenly drifted in front of her as she grabbed it and read what it said. Do you wish to make a move against the drugs that the ivory cobra is making? Furrowing her brows, Alara created a ball of flames. Who's there? She asked cautiously. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you want to do. Heh, what can a girl like me do? Alara retorted whilst keeping an eye out for whoever was doing this. You can use the intel I have gathered to mobilize the Kasidan family in order to eradicate the 3 factions currently resting in the slums. Ho? And what intel will that be? Doesn't matter if I tell you since I plan on distributing this to the other families. Of course, if you guys don't make a move, I suppose revealing everything to the city and causing mass panic is also an option in getting rid of this plague. For something that seems to be of good intentions, aren't you being a little careless with the lives of people? Alara narrowed her eyes. In moments like these, a few sacrifices are bound to happen. If you think about it, the casualties probably already shot through the roof during the development phase of this drug. But I have no more time to waste on you. Either you use this data and avoid mass panic, or I can release this data all over this city and force everyone to move against the slums. Your call. Alara didn't say anything since the illusion had already faded away. In front of her laid all the notes and 2 data chips. Seems like the notes are for proof, she muttered. Unfortunately, the notes seemed like they were printed off, so they couldn't track the handwriting back to someone. Looking at the 2 data chips, Alara gave in to her curiosity and opened her spare laptop in case of viruses. Looking at all the maps and concise information on all the factions along with what they were working on in the dark, Alara couldn't help but widen her eyes. While there were some parts where it was undiscovered, just this alone was more than what her scouts had found. As for the second chip, it contained a video file labeled, Consequences of the Drug. With the title being self-explanatory, Alara watched it seriously. Even though the video was only a minute long, each passing second caused her complexion to worsen. Taking a deep breath, Alara had to calm herself since the drug was worse than she had thought. No, this cannot wait any longer. Alara stood up and grabbed the 2 data chips. Making sure to take the notes with her, she stormed out of her room. Young Dash. Shut up. Tell my old man I need to talk with him. This is serious. Alara shut her maid up instantly. Flinching from her commanding tone, the maid could only obey. Meanwhile, Shiro was currently making her way to the Cermak family. However, unlike what she had to do with Alara, all that she needed to do was leave the data on the family head's desk. It was easy since he had just gone to the toilet. And now the Aspar family. Shiro muttered outside of the Cermak family mansion. She had previously been to the Aspar family due to the fact that she had bought the access to the Mana Springs. Back then, she had seen the defenses of the building and wasn't sure if she could sneak her way inside without being found. Even if she used Rift Walker, she may accidentally activate another formation and send the entire building on high alert. I'll find out when I get there, I suppose. She shrugged slightly. Upon arriving at the mansion, Shiro started to observe the mansion and saw that all the runes were glowing with a soft red light. What a pain. She frowned. Well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then never mind. Crouching down, Shiro narrowed her eyes and made a break for the mansion. Avoiding the patrols, she stepped on the grass. *KRRR. A formation slowly lit up below her as she instantly started to analyze the patterns and check what kind of formation this was. Attack type spell. fire arrow, and fire wire-based methods. She thought, just reading the basic information about the formation. Twisting her body so that she was almost parallel with the ground, Shiro avoided 3 rows of fire wires that cut towards her along with some fire arrows. Rift Walker. Making her way past the formation using the memorized layout, she had recorded the moment the formation activated. She reappeared on the edge of the formation. Jumping up, she activated Rift Walker a few more times to avoid the formations and hid herself on the roof. Watching the guards rush towards the formation, Shiro narrowed her eyes when she saw Gilbert. He was the mystic knight apprentice that had escorted her to the Mana Springs the first time she had been here. He crouched down near where she had stepped on the grass and frowned. Tracing her steps, his frown only deepened since the steps were too far apart. What could have made these steps? He wondered to himself. If the intruder had jumped in the air, the formation would have easily shot them to death. But from what had happened, the formation seemed to lose the target for a short moment before finding them again. Increase the security measures. Do not, and I mean do not let our masters come to harm. He ordered as the guards nodded their heads. Looking around him at the formations that failed to stop the invader, he frowned before re-entering the mansion. Shiro was currently sneaking through the entire mansion whilst sweat dripped off her face. How many formations do you need inside a house? She cried out in her mind. Every few seconds after dodging a formation led to another one. This allowed the guards to slowly catch up to her since they could just follow where the formations were active. Especially Gilbert. She couldn't help but curse at how good his tracking skills were. There were several close calls that she couldn't have escaped if not for Rift Walker. As the pursuit continued, Shiro slowly mapped out the mansion but frowned when she couldn't find the master bedroom. Strange, she thought to herself. Just as she was about to continue her search, she sensed Gilbert getting close once more and entered the rift. Positioning herself above and behind a statue, she lowered her presence and used Shadow Cloak for extra insurance. She saw Gilbert crouching down where she was previously. Tisk! He clicked his tongue in frustration. The intruder was a sneaky one this time since no matter how hard he tried, they would just disappear like a phantom. This is too strange. I've already gotten intel that both the Cermak family and the Kasadan family had intruders that passed them some vital information about the slums. Could they be doing the same here? Gilbert thought with a frown. Seeing Gilbert think about the situation, Shiro decided to pass the information on to him. She remembers that he was a butler. As a butler, he would have the chance to interact with the master of the Osbar household. Pinching her fingers together, she created a flute and raised it up to her lips. Activating cold illusions, she saw Gilbert instantly pulled out a sword and stand on guard. Come out, he said calmly as his sword lit up with a black, purple, and blue aura. Every flicker of the aura seemed to draw a picture of the galaxy with stars shining ever so slightly. Asterisk bang. When a metal plate appeared in front of him, he immediately slashed his sword but was surprised when he saw the metal plate almost unscathed. What a brute! Shiro thought with annoyance. She had the feeling that he was going to slash at anything that appears, so she used her Snowmancer class to create a plate so that she could test him out first. She didn't actually think he would slash at the first possible moment. While he was paused in surprise at the fact that the metal plate was almost undamaged, Shiro took this chance to disassemble it and send out a piece of paper. What a brute. What if I had sent important information instead? You would have destroyed that, you know? Shiro decided that since she was going to pass the information to him, she was going to mess with him a little. Since you have the capabilities to send this information to the 2 lesser families and even threaten them with spreading this out, I believe you have multiple copies. He replied seriously. Ho ho, and what if I said that was a lie? Then too bad. We can just mobilize with the 2 other families when the time comes. And if the entire thing is a ruse? What if I made it up and just wanted to take the families for a ride? Why would you use so much effort in making something so believable just so that you can mess around with us? Well, there can be a lot of reasons. The fact that the families caused destruction across the city could be one. Gilbert had nothing to say since that is indeed the truth. Every time the families fight, it was always the civilians that suffer even if they're not injured. Properties would be damaged and shops might be completely destroyed. Silence, huh? There were no more messages after that as the cold illusion faded away. Gilbert sheathed his sword away as his heart was heavy. He was about to inform the other families that this may be a ruse until he felt something in his pocket. There were 2 data chips and a paper message. Just kidding, of course you'll get the data as well. Do remember to eradicate the slum factions completely, okay? Asterisk bang. Punching his fist against the wall, Gilbert wanted to give the culprit a slap or 2 for messing with his emotions. F***CK. He cursed out. Meanwhile, the culprit in question was giggling outside the mansion since she had a camera on the chips which showed her his expression after reading her note. Now then, tomorrow should be the time where I'll get to fight my shadow again, Shiro muttered as her grin faded away. She had already done all that she needed to do. Gather information and distribute it. If they don't make a move, then she'll show this to every adventurer in Kairosa and force them to move. ####. Are you sure you want to challenge your shadow straight away? Lyrica asked as she and Madison were seeing Shiro off. Yeah, the faster I complete this the better. Plus, if I get stronger, my shadow will get stronger as well. Shiro smiled since she had already informed the duo about the contents of her 5th star up. Don't get too hung up though, Shiro. I've heard that you can class up even without getting the 5th star. Last time you failed, you suffered quite the backlash, didn't you? If it wasn't for your fire of life, you would probably still be in bed right now. If you always take the easy route, life would get boring. Shiro shrugged. True. Well, good luck, Shiro. By the way, we've got a surprise for you after you come out, so send us a text when you're ready. Lyrica smiled. Shiro nodded with a smile as she was teleported back into the truth realm. Her emotions instantly faded as there was no more messing around anymore. Since she knew herself and what she could do, she didn't need to hesitate. Last time she allowed the shadow to take the initiative, and that caused her to be on the defensive. This time was going to be different. Begin. Seeing her shadow form once more, Shiro immediately slammed her palm into the ground and sent out her killing intent. *KRRR. Shadow furrowed her brows and quickly activated Faded Snow movement to prevent herself from being frozen. *Cling. Since she had used Faded Snow movement on her legs, that meant her upper body was exposed. Ice chains wrapped around the shadow's torso and secured her in place. She attempted the same on Shiro, but it was dodged easily due to the fact that her shadow had struck an illusion. When her ice chains sprang up, she synchronized the cold illusion with the sound the chains made and created an illusion of her. While she was countering her shadow every step of the way, she was also forming the skill for breaking the shadow's mana links. Naturally, she was still going for the kill. Breaking the mana link was just an added bonus. The mana link is situated in one's mana realm. When the person uses mana to power a spell, the links would gather the mana from the realm/their reservoir and send it through the caster's body. I need to track the mana back to the source and destroy the links that way, Shiro thought whilst twisting her body to the side and avoided an ice spear that aimed for her rear. Grabbing the ice spear with her bare hands, Shiro sent her mana into the spear and rewrote the spell so that it was her own. Huh! She shouted out whilst throwing the spear towards Shadow with Third Phantom to boost its power. *Boom. Shiro wasn't particularly surprised when her shadow managed to dodge the spear. To track the mana back to the mana realm, I'll need to sense their body whilst they cast a spell. However, I can also flood their entire system. While that doesn't track to the mana realm since it'll close itself off to protect the links, I'll be able to restrain Shadow for a short moment. In that time, the mana realm will eventually reopen itself to heal her. Seeing her shadow clench her palm to create the same magic circle that took over her ice, Shiro flicked her wrist and created a hand cannon with a special bullet she was working on in the day. While she could override a spell to a certain degree, she wasn't able to expand it to a domain like her shadow, which is why she created a substitute option instead. Mana Disruption Bullet. A bullet that sends out a pulse of mana that would overwrite parts of the magic circle to break it apart. The effectiveness of this bullet depends on how much MP was used to create it. *Bang. Ping. The magic circle shattered apart as her shadow shot towards her with a hand cannon. Twisting her body, Shiro created some heel guards and proceeded to roundhouse kick the bullet out of the air. It was an easy feat for Shiro since she knew where the bullet was going. After that, it was only a matter of timing. Pooey. Spitting in disdain, Shiro disassembled her gun and charged towards her shadow. Rift Walker. Her body phased into the rift. Shadow knew what she was doing and copied since the risk of Shiro appearing near her was dangerous. However, both of them never expected the rifts to be connected. Shiro could see Shadow's surprise in front of her as both of them were in the rift together. She reacted quickly to take advantage of this as she clenched her hands and activated ice chains. Shadow quickly left the rift to avoid the chains. Rolling heavily against the ground, Shadow looked up to keep an eye out for Shiro would follow after her. Slamming her palms down, Shadow erected a rotating barrier of ice that protected her from Shiro's strike from behind her. Unfortunately for Shadow, this had caused her to be stationary. Frozen Hell Series, Frozen Slumber. Asterisk cling cling cling. 6 chains wrapped around the barrier, forcing it to stop. Cracks started to appear all over the dome as the spell started to crumble the barrier to ice dust. Activating Rift Walker to escape from the spell, her shadow created 2 hand cannons and shot at the magic circles, destroying them with the mana disruption bullets. Makes sense, Shiro thought whilst appearing behind her shadow. Asterisk bang. Sending a palm at her shadow's back, Shiro barely managed to flood her body with mana before she used Faded Snow movement to disperse most of the damage. However, it was perfect for Shiro since it allowed her to take a quick glimpse at where the mana came from. While the route wasn't perfect, since the mana realm closed itself right after using Faded Snow movement, she had memorized roughly 65% of the route. Wait, it's the same as mine. Shiro narrowed her eyes as she realized the 65% she had memorized was the same as hers. I suppose it's because she's a direct copy. Looking at her shadow, who seemed to be frustrated about being suppressed by her, Shiro sneered in order to provoke her shadow. Unfortunately, she kept her calm and instead activated her pseudo-elemental armor. Flicking the spiked chains on her wrist, Shadow sent both chains lashing towards Shiro, who activated Faded Snow movement to dodge. However, Shadow grinned since her goal was accomplished. Wherever her chains passed, a magic circle appeared in the air. The sheer quantity was too much for Shiro to avoid. To make matters worse, one of the chains had detached itself and latched onto Shiro's body to drain mana from her. So you're also learning while you fight, huh? A little too late, though. Shiro smiled as her body exploded into ice mist. Shadow widened her eyes when she realized that she was just an illusion. Asterisk boom. A palm stuck against her back one more time as she saw Shiro appearing behind her. She could feel mana claw its way through her systems and invade her mana realm. She realized that after she collided with the ground, Shiro had activated cold illusions to wait for the perfect moment to strike. You're not the only one who can be a sneaky *TCH, Shiro said whilst pulling the trigger and shot Shadow in the head. Since her mana realm was being invaded, she wasn't able to activate Faded Snow movement. Asterisk ding. A victory sound rang out as Shadow started to fade away along with all the damage that had accumulated in the Truth Realm. Once she confirmed that she had won, Shiro panted heavily and collapsed on her back. During the entirety of that fight, she was abusing the hell out of her own mana links to perform as best they could. While she did that, she had to endure the pain whilst also controlling her body to try to fight on at an even footing with her shadow. During this fight, she had avoided close-quarters combat as much as she could since she knew her shadow could perform better. Hence, she stuck with long range and trickery, which thankfully paid off in the end. Furthermore, the stress of forcing her body to constantly attack with little to no defense wasn't something Shiro liked to experience. But the sight of trial past caused her to smile. An ice cocoon wrapped around her, sending her into a deep slumber. It was unknown how long she had slept for, but when Shiro reopened her eyes, she felt like her entire body was stiff. URG. She groaned as she tried to stretch her body. Cracking her neck, Shiro couldn't help but notice a slight increase in her height. Ohaya? Have I finally become an adult? She muttered in excitement. Quickly conjuring up an ice mirror, Shiro was shocked at her own appearance. She was now just a little under 5 feet 5, which can be considered as a short adult. Her complexion looked rosier than before, and her iris changed from azure to pure black. In addition to this, her features became a little sharper, which detracted from the childish feeling that was previously there. Unfortunately, her breasts didn't increase at all. However, her attention was drawn away from her chest since she was slightly entranced by her own appearance. She didn't know what exactly happened, but it was as if her charm just received a plus 5,000 in stat points. Wow. Raising her hand, she touched her own face. A crest? She muttered in surprise. A snow crest of sorts on the back of her right hand. She had a few questions but decided that it was best to see what the star up had brought her first. Snow Girl. Title gained. Ice Princess. Point gained per level increased to 500 per level. Skill gained. Glacial Domain, Tier 2. Converted Ice Magic and Snow Magic into Glacial Magic, Tier 2. Title: Ice Princess. A beautiful being that holds control over all the ice around her vicinity. Gained Ice Princess Insignia, Glacial Domain. Ohia? This miss is now a princess, huh? Shiro chuckled slightly at the title. Ice Insignia. Plus 50% affinity with intelligent ice-based monsters. Plus 50% hostility with intelligent fire-based monsters. Plus 65% cold element resistance. Plus 80% affinity with cold elements. Glacial Domain, Tier 2, grows with user. All ice magic used within a 200-meter radius around you is yours to control. Any ice you create can be controlled almost freely. Increase affinity with cold-type spells. Can't be overwritten unless the enemy is 20 levels above you. The fact that the skill can't be overwritten unless the enemy is 20 levels above her was extremely useful. Even though 20 levels difference will become rather common in the future, she understands that this skill was currently Tier 2. Now to mention, the difference of 20 levels was an insane amount at this current period of time. To make matters worse for her enemies, even if they were Tier 3 level 60, as long as they were an ice-based mage, they would be helpless against her. As for glacial magic, Shiro had seen this a few times in her past. This was essentially an evolved version of ice magic, much like lava and magma to fire magic. However, for her to be able to unlock this near the peak of Tier 2 was unthinkable. The elements would only evolve when one reaches the peak of Tier 3. She knew this because one of the requirements to reach Tier 4 is to evolve one's element. Status. Name: Shiro. Race: Snow Girl. Evolution criteria yet to be met. Title: Shadow Empress. Proficient monster: 108/500 humans killed. Fratricide: One Woman Battalion. Creator of the Frozen Hell series. Incomplete. Ice Princess. Level: 45. Class: Snow Girl. Nanomancer. HP: 103,000/206/250. MP: 132,000/488/070. STR: 1100 plus 100. VIT: 1300 plus 200. INT: 3000 plus 550. AGI: 2000 plus 450. DEX: 1500 plus 100. DEF: 500 plus 100. Equals title bonus. Unassigned points: 0. Attunements: Ice Dash Glacial Tier 2. Lightning Tier 2. Metal Tier 2. Shadow Ed Tier 2, augmented with Calamity's Will. Balance: 310,230,000 US dollars. Equipment: tap to display. Skills: Snow Girl. Tier 2 Glacial Magic, Passive Regeneration, Blessed by Ice, Faded Snow Movement, Glacial Aura, Glacial Touch, Glacial Breath. Ice Field Affinity, Cold Illusion. Nanomancer. Dagger Creation, Nanotech Engineering Tier 2, Sword Creation, Bow Creation, Heavy Weapon Creation, Shield Creation, Armor Creation, Hand Cannon Creation. Frozen Hell Series. Frozen Slumber, Azure Hellfire. Ancient Healing Arts. Fire of Life. Other. Minimap, inspection, disguise, mana barrier, lightning magic, tier 2, metal magic, tier 2, shadow magic, tier 2, combust. Shared skills, Een. Shadow buff, tier 1. Ice chain, tier 1. Shadow cloak, tier 1. Shadow talon, tier 1. Rift walker, tier 1. Absorption/redirection, tier 1. Shadow affinity, tier 2. With her ice magic changing to glacial magic, Shiro was slightly curious about its power. Asterisk click. Snapping her fingers, Shiro created a glacial spear in her hands. Oh my! She could feel the structure differences between the glacial spear and the ice spear. If ice spear can be described as a twig, then the glacial spear is a tree. Not only is it stronger and sharper, but its resistance is also higher. Not only that, but she could also insert more mana into the spear to increase its power. I don't even think my current capabilities with my Snowmancer class will penetrate my glacial magic. She mused to herself since her hand cannon simply doesn't have the penetrating power required to break past something that's supposed to be unlocked in Tier 4. Now that I've got my 5th star, all I need is to reach level 50, then I'll rank up. Though I still need Nantion to give me the Phoenix Pill. Sighing slightly, Shiro exited the trials. When she reopened her eyes, she saw that the entire camp was currently empty. Where did everyone go? She opened the tent and saw that most things were left behind except for valuables. Shiro narrowed her eyes in suspicion as she had an idea of what could have happened. It's either the families have decided to attack straight away, or that a party is going on, she thought with a frown. Leaving the tent, Shiro jumped up and sent out a pulse of her mana for Een to feel. Since she was her pet, she would recognize her mana signature almost immediately. And as expected, Een soon appeared out the rift and landed on Shiro's shoulder. You miss me? Shiro grinned. Een, who only just took a look at her face, paused in shock. Ha ha ha, charmed are we? Shiro laughed and tapped Yin's head. Een only turned her head away with a huff. After messing around with Een for a short moment, Shiro walked through the allies and towards the city. I should probably put on my face mask, Shiro said whilst pulling up her face mask along with making a hood. Een, who had been reunited with her long-lost home, the hood, dived in with joy. Patting Yin's body lightly, Shiro narrowed her eyes and scanned the buildings around her. She could tell that there were several people who seemed to be nervous, but were analyzing the perfect opportunity to strike. So it seems like the families are pushing the slums back. I should do my part, Shiro thought with a smile. Creating a tiny drone in her hands that was barely visible to the eye, she flicked it upwards and examined the people who were watching her. Ivory Cobra, huh? No mercy then. She grinned when she saw the markings unique to Ivory Cobra. Walking to one of the building walls, she gently placed her palm and activated Glacial Touch. Since her control of ice had been significantly improved with her ice domain, she no longer needs to release Killing Intent to activate it. Rather, Killing Intent will only amplify the effects. *KRRR. Ice spread quickly as the building was soon encased in a thin layer of ice. Before the faction members could even react, Shiro twisted her palm and created a neon blue magic circle. *bang bang bang bang. Glacial spears shot out of the ice and pierced all of the faction members within the room. Bingo, Shiro grinned, seeing her kill count increase. Walking calmly through the alleys and killing any faction members she could sense, Shiro eventually found herself in front of a barricade. A barricade? She thought in confusion. However, her face instantly became blank when she felt a thin sliver of Killing Intent aimed towards her. Shifting her heels a little, ice exploded around her to form a barrier that warded off several attacks from a 180-degree cone in front of her. Focusing on who sent an attack at her, Shiro flexed her fingers a little as 10 glacial spears appeared in the air. Stop! Don't hit the wrong person! Someone suddenly shouted out as the situation came to a halt. Shiro merely glanced through her barrier without emotion, which caused those who were watching to pale slightly. Her black eyes were like a void that they couldn't see the end of. The blank face and Killing Intent, She caused them to feel like they were confronting an absolute monster that couldn't be defeated. Alara quickly jogged over and saw that Shiro was unharmed. However, she paused in her footsteps, seeing her gaze. Merciless. If they had truly wanted to fight her, there will be no turning back. Quickly composing herself as much as she could, Alara approached Shiro, who dropped her barrier. Sorry about that. We're currently rounding up every member that belongs to the 3 factions in the slums, so they're a little trigger happy. Why haven't you evacuated yet? She asked. Busy. Didn't hear. Shiro replied with a shrug. After her experience with her shadow, she had understood that she should always take the initiative. Hence, the moment they attacked, she instantly entered combat mode and prepared her counterattack. She feels different, more dangerous. Alara thought with slight amounts of fear. The feeling she gave her before was just a talented mage, but now, it was akin to an unsheathed blade. Harmless when the flat side hits, but always ready with the sharp edges. No matter what comes, she is always ready to kill. Oh, by the way, we would appreciate some help with cleaning out the slums. Would you like to join? Alara offered, as she wanted to see if her capabilities had changed. If it has, and she became as dangerous as she felt, then she was someone they absolutely had to try bringing to their side. Why not? Shiro nodded, since she was the person who stated this whole operation against the slums. It would be rude to miss out on the fun, wouldn't it? Okay, I'll quickly brief you on the plan. We're currently surrounding the entire slum area and not letting any of them escape. The elders of the Adventurers Guild and the families are acting as support for when the bosses of the factions appear. Our job is simple, and that is to kill all members of the factions. Easy enough. So why are we waiting here and not entering? Just wait. Alara smiled. Not long after, 5 beams of light shot up into the air, each representing a different element. 5-element cage. You people from New York might not know this, but this is one of our city's trump cards. Do you think living by the ocean is easy? The beasts that may come up ashore will wreck the city easily. Hence, the elders banded together to create an original spell that cages in the enemy with all 5 elements. This has the power to restrain the level 80 juvenile Hydra. Alara looked up at the spell with slight amounts of pride. Looking at the 4-layered spell that was creating a cage around the slums area, Shiro focused intently at the blue section, since she realized something she could never do before. I can see it. I can see the flow. I can control that part of the spell. She thought while staring at the 5-element cage. She felt like she could override the entire spell just with a simple flick of her fingers. Could this be what the insignia meant? A plus 80% affinity with cold elements allows me to understand any spell that uses the cold element better. Glancing down at the light blue crest on the back of her hand, Shiro smiled slightly. Asterisk boom. The ground shook with the completion of the spell. Everyone, kill them all and leave none behind. Alara shouted out as they charged into the barrier. Shiro didn't dawdle either, since she was eager to test out the capabilities of her 5-star Snow Girl class. Asterisk crack. Stomping down with all her strength, Shiro cracked the pavements and charged past the group. Fast! Alara widened her eyes when she saw Shiro easily overtake speed-type adventurers with ease. Kicking her body off the side of the buildings, Shiro launched her body into the air and brought her hands together. Frozen Hell, Frozen Slumber. With her evolution of ice-type spells into glacial types, it naturally meant her strongest attack has also gained a buff. She could feel her control over the spell improve substantially and converted the mana that would be used to create the chains into the main magic circle. While the magic circle that appeared was only 2-fold and not 3, showing that it was still within the range of Tier 2 spells, the sheer area covered wasn't something a Tier 2 could match up to. Freeze. Asterisk KRRR. The circles lit up with a blue light, causing a blizzard to instantly appear in the slums area, freezing anything it touched. But with the increased range, the power would naturally suffer. And to make matters worse, if she tried to increase the power, it would only strain her mana links further. However, power was never the goal. Ice Domain. The skill allowed her to almost freely control any ice she creates. Meaning, this entire place is now under my control. Shiro grinned as she could sense everyone's location through her eyes.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.